to me, cherishing someone is valuing that relationship so much that is integrated into your very soul. And not that everything's always rosy or perfect, but that together you value each other above yourself alone.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 201 of the Get Your Marriage On podcast. This is part 2 of the podcast we released last week, episode number 200. And if you haven't listened to that one, I highly recommend you pause this episode and go back and listen to number 200 first, because this is a continuation of that. A project that I started a few months ago to better understand what does it mean for me to cherish my spouse. I share a tragic story about my wife's cousin and how that really propelled us to understand what it means to cherish others better. I've sought out mentors to help me understand this concept better, and you get to hear snippets of the conversations I've had with them. You get to be a fly on the wall and learn with me on what it really means to cherish your spouse and to love them really, really well. Of all the things I talk about on the podcast, sex, orgasms, initiating, foreplay, I think learning how to cherish your spouse wholeheartedly takes the cake. This is the most important, the sum of everything that I wish you would get from my podcast. This would be it. I hope these 2 episodes become the most downloaded episodes of the entire podcast. And this is what I want to be known for. I want you to know that to really love and cherish your spouse is at the heart of everything we do, even your sexual interactions, which we talk a lot about on this podcast, right? It's about how do you cherish your spouse through the language of expressing your sexuality and sharing that with your spouse exclusively. So today you get to hear from 3 more mentors that I look up to a lot. First is Tammy Hill. Second is Danielle Savory. And third is Alex and Katie Dutton. So you get 3 different perspectives here on the same kind of thing, different stages of life, different worldviews. My first guest today is Tammy Hill. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. She's taught at Brigham Young University in the past. She is a mentor of mine and an all-around fantastic woman. Before we jump into that conversation, I just want you to know about a few announcements. These are important and they could really help you. So first is our in-person retreats. These retreats are fun, they're upbeat, they're a great excuse for you and your spouse to get away for a fun weekend, away from the distractions of everyday stuff, and to really focus on your marriage relationship at a deep level. You get to work with me and my team for 4 days, 3 nights in a beautiful setting, and all those details are on my website. The dates are October 10th through 13th, and the one in March is March 27th through 30th, so you don't want to miss that. Next is enrollment is open for our program. This is the Get Your Marriage On program, our signature program, where couples can do the work to grow together intimately, and all those details are on my website too. And last is September is right around the corner. I want to invite you to join my wife Emily and I in making your September the sexiest September you've ever had. We call it Sextember for short. And there's a challenge associated with it, which means you can win some prizes if you participate. All those details are in the Intimately Us app, so you'll want to download those for sure. All right, now let's talk to Tammy Hill. So Tammy, you have 12 children. You're extremely accomplished. You're an author of 2 books. You've taught at a university level. You're a licensed marriage family therapist and also certified sex therapist. You've seen tons of people, lots of couples, lots of issues, lots of hard things. And you yourself, you lost your first husband. So I think of all the people I know, you're very, very qualified to answer this question. What does it mean to you to really cherish somebody?
Yeah. Well, Dan, I've been thinking about it since you sent me the email. And actually, today in therapy, I met with a young father, 4 children. The baby's just 4 months old, which is how old my baby was when my husband died. and his wife suddenly died. And he is just grieving so hard, and sitting with him for an hour, it brought back so much of the pain and heaviness that happens when you lose a spouse. And it kind of made me rethink maybe how I might answer this question on this episode tonight with you. If you were to think about what would you miss if your wife Emily passed away, just think of all the things that you would miss and the heaviness that would come from it. To me, cherishing someone is valuing that relationship so much that is integrated into your very soul. And then when it's gone, it feels like it's just totally ripped out of your very soul too, and it hurts, it's so painful. And so to me, it is loving and appreciating and having gratitude for the opportunity to be in a relationship with someone who loves you, and not that everything's always rosy or perfect, but that together you value each other above yourself alone, you know? I think that's what I think cherishing
Mhm.
is.
That's so good. It's hard to love another person, I think, isn't it? In a way, I mean, there's not a lot of love in the world. That's why love is so precious, to really love somebody.
Mhm.
What are some examples that you've seen in your own marriage or with as a parent to children of just acts of genuine love that you've found?
To me, one of the very best ways that I see couples love each other is when they are genuinely excited about their spouse's dreams and goals. And my husband, Jeff, is I don't know anyone like him. He gets genuinely so even more excited about my life than I'm excited about my own life. I love when they truly cheer on each other and help each other accomplish their dreams. That's something I love. I love when people take time to create passion together and create space for that to happen is so easy with busyness of life and exhaustion that comes with the busyness of life to kind of put sex on the back burner. And I know both of us have a passion for this in our work that we do. And I just believe there is such energy that comes from a passionate marriage that can't be found in any other realm. And I believe that the love, the true love and exposure in that love is really knowing one another in a way that you don't see another soul and no one else sees you that way either. And that's just such sacred space to me. So cherishing has a lot to do with the passion I think that you build together, helping each other with dreams. I think showing respect for one another's differences. Um, we have very different styles. I'm sure maybe you and your wife do as well. And maybe politically, we kind of feel a little different about some things. And there's so many things that can tear us apart or make us argue or get ugly or snippy with each other. And it's all right to have differences, but you don't have to get ugly about the differences. Those are the things that come to my mind first off.
That's great. I think differences is part of married
Mhm.
life. We all have differences, like you mentioned. What are some traps that couples fall into around differences? And what are some ideas that you can encourage people to think about to help them see differences in a different way that are more productive?
That's a good question. I think when we start focusing on the differences, in a way, we start looking for the negative in each other instead of looking for the goodness in one another. And a lot of times it's easy to, or even natural, maybe our natural tendency is to look at what's not going right or look at what we don't have or wish that we had something a little different, right? And to see what it is we're
Right.
missing kind of. And when we focus on the differences, I think it's easier to see and to feel that maybe we got robbed in this relationship, or there would have been someone out there that you would have been happier with. And maybe you start actually checking out other people if it gets to a place where you have enough. of a difference and the resentment build up between you. I always talk about, like, if I had a great big white piece of paper right here and I took a pencil and put a little dot on this blank piece of paper, our eyes are going to focus on the dot, right? That's the one mar that we see on the paper.
Right.
And so to me, I have to kind of
Our brains are hardwired for
right,
that.
right.
Right.
And so instead of focusing on that dot, to think of all of the good, the white, all of the things that are happening that are good and that are evidence that your life together is really quite sweet. And so I think reframing differences, appreciating the differences, but not getting stuck in them and trying to focus more on what is it that we together bless? How do we bless one another together?
I like that. That's very good, very good. That reminds me, there was a time I was frustrated in my own marriage, and so I went for a nighttime run to just get out my anger, beat my feet against the pavement. And I was listening to a podcast, and it had nothing to do with marriage, but the message was along the lines that you get what you focus on. And the person talking told a story about how they had a book in their home growing up where part of it was sealed. It was like a metal clamp over a portion of this book. And he and his brother tried to like get that clamp off, but they ignored the part that you could read, the unsealed
Mhm,
part, right?
mhm,
They completely ignored that. And in that moment, it's like God spoke to me. It's like, this is what I'm doing in my own marriage. I'm ignoring
mhm,
the part you can read and enjoy, and so intently focused on the sealed part,
mhm.
the not allowed part.
I like
Wasn't helpful.
I like that analogy, Dan, and I agree. A lot of times, if we're just being our natural selves, a lot of times it is looking for what we don't have rather than celebrating what we do have.
One last question. How does inviting Christ into your life help you love and cherish your spouse better?
That's such a good question.
Or how have you seen that operate and work in your life?
I feel when I'm aware of my personal covenants I feel like I've made with God, and when I am thinking of others with a view, more of an eternal perspective, and even especially with my children in the past, when raising my children, a lot of times I would pray that I could see them the way that God sees them so that maybe I could love them a little better because sometimes
Yes.
kids aren't easy to love sometimes, teenagers.
Uh-huh.
So I believe when I personally am aligned, living my way, that I'm able to have a more generous heart. I'm able to see people more clearly in their divinity, and of course, that always will benefit a relationship, marriage or otherwise.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so excited to listen to this episode. So,
Yeah. Be
I'm
very good.
honored that to be with you.
Next is my mentor, Danielle Savory. She's a fellow sex and marriage coach, and I love her outlook on a lot of things to do with sex. She likes to center pleasure as a center of sexual interactions, not just about being so goal-oriented or about doing things out of duty. I really like her work on mindset. So when it comes to cherishing your spouse through your sexuality, I can't think of anyone better that might have a perspective here that can really help me better understand what it means to cherish a spouse, specifically in the sexual arena. So Danielle, I want to ask you, what does it mean for you to cherish someone, sexually or otherwise?
Well, when I first heard this question, like I absolutely loved it because I do think that cherish it's such a beautiful word that goes beyond like what does it mean to love somebody or what does it mean to appreciate somebody. It feels to me more like a sense of awe in a lot of ways, like when you're outside or you have this like profound moment with like your spirituality or in nature and it's like this like awe, like it's so big and full that it fills you up, like almost overwhelming in some ways.
Uh-huh.
And so when you asked that question, it really made me think about how does cherishing work into my own relationship, because I appreciate my husband. I love my husband, you know, I am attracted to my husband. You know, there's all these other words that I would use. And also, I feel like there is this level of cherishing, but I wouldn't say that was always there, or it started and then kind of went away as life goes away, because that sense of awe with the person that you're with when you've been with them for decades naturally kind of can lose its luster oftentimes. And there was this moment years ago, so it's a very common like Buddhist practice sometimes, and in other religions and spirituality practices and mindfulness practices, where you contemplate, and this sounds kind of weird, but you contemplate somebody's that you love's death, or you contemplate losing something. And the idea is to really get in touch with this feeling of impermanence. And
Right.
any time that I've done that kind of like a practice, and, you know, in my own life, I've lost people, but you know, I've also just like witnessed, especially hitting home, you know, couples that I know where somebody has passed or something like that. It has brought up that sense of awe when I look at, whether it's my kids or my husband, like this sense of like a cherish. Like I really, really cherish these moments. Like I want to hold on to them. They're so important to me. And doing that practice regularly, like allowing myself, because it's a scary one to do. Like you're like, why would I think about my loved ones dying, right? It doesn't sound like a fun thing to do. And it's one of the most beautiful practices, you know, that you can do, because it brings that sense of like awe and gratitude. And then those little things like you didn't take out the garbage, or like you never this, or like the things that we typically get in arguments about don't seem that important. And not only that, a lot of times when you get out of this kind of a practice, and I just walk out of my office, like our offices are right next to each other, we work together. I mean, work in this, you know, and at home all day every day. But it's almost like in the movies, you know, in like Christmas Carol or something, where it's like you see them for the first time again, or you see them with these new eyes. And I have really brought that in, not just into my important relationships, but because of the way that intimacy works, because of the way that we get turned on naturally, is through novelty, is through being curious, is through like this like enamoredness that we can
Yes.
have with each other. And so when I allow myself to get to a place of cherish, it naturally brings on a turn on that might be different than just like explicitly like erotic turn on, or thinking of fantasy, or doing these other things. Like it really creates this very rich experience of slowing down and, you know, having this novelty. Even though it's like somebody that's so familiar, you're also looking at them through the lens of impermanence, and like, I don't know how long, and what if this really was the last day, and like how that would look and how that would feel, and like getting into it and like soaking in every moment. So then when it comes to that perspective of cherishing your spouse, especially around sexuality, it's like really paying attention from this place of like awe and like enjoyment and surrender and trust. And I just think that some of my best sexual experiences has come from these like absolute cherishing moments of like, this is what we have, this is what we have right now. And you know, beyond that, I just think that it allows it has an impact where it stays with you longer, and you realize like how important it is to like prioritize this, because you really don't know. So it's like, I want to cherish the moments that we have. Like we have this week, like when are we going to be connecting, you know, like, so that no matter what, like I know that I'm going to look back and be like, even if there was an argument right before we left, like there was still moments where we were so connected and intimate and cherishing each other on the regular. It puts a sense of, I don't want to say urgency in those connections, but for sure a sense of importance, a sense of priority when you're measuring up everything else, and when it's so easy to be like, does sex really matter? Does pleasure really matter? Do these things really matter? It really can put in this sense of like, no, this really matters because it's impermanent.
What's it like being on the receiving end of cherishing? In other words, what's it like when your husband cherishes you?
Well, I feel like he cherishes me every time I'm naked. So I mean that's part of our love language, and like our, I think that's always been something. And
Uh-huh.
I I think for me, especially when we were younger, it was a confusing thing for me because I had like a body that was looked at by other men in certain ways, and he looked at me in a similar way, but there was something different. And as my body changed, or as like when I went through like my health issues, or I was having this really hard time, like that didn't change. And it was like this first time that it really like dawned on me in a very visceral way, because you can be like, of course he loves me through everything, he loves me through whatever, but when you're not feeling lovable yourself, like when you're going through these issues and just like, how could you love me, like I'm whatever right now, or whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be.
Right.
And having somebody completely like not just love you, but like cherish you. And I hesitate to use the word worship, but like worship you in a certain way,
Yes.
right? Like
Uh-huh.
really like look and like love, and you realize it isn't this superficial thing. It's like so much more. And it just really, I think being on the receiving end allows, more than anything, has allowed me to have more love for myself,
Yeah.
allowed me to feel really lovable and worthy, because when you realize that there's somebody there that cherishes you when you're at your worst, and I don't just mean like health wise, like something you can't control as much, but like at your worst behavior, at your worst, like, like
Uh-huh.
things that you're not really proud of, and they can still hold space for you and cherish you, then it really shows that they're, like, oh, I can offer that to myself. Like I can offer myself that own like level of compassion and love and grace, that I think that so many, especially us women, sometimes can be so hard on ourselves for a variety of things, that being on the receiving end of cherishing has, allowed me to find my own self-compassion.
That is so good. What you're saying, Danielle, really resonates with me about how being cherished and chosen by someone when it's hard to even choose yourself reminds me of like it was in 1954 when the first man ran a mile in under 4 minutes. Because before then, everyone said it's not possible, the human body isn't
Yeah.
built to do this. And Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile record. And guess what? Because he did, a few weeks later, a second person broke the 4-minute mile. And then a third person broke the mile. Because he like showed that it's possible.
Yeah.
It's like it was a change in their belief. What they used to
Yeah.
believe they couldn't, and now they believe they can. So it's really about a mindset shift for a lot of athletes. And I
Yeah.
think, do you see this a lot in your practice, where it's really about the mindset shift? It's about a new belief in them that makes them more capable of cherishing and being cherished?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a belief, but honestly, even more than a belief, it's still a mindset thing, but it's a shift of attention. I think that so many people have the ability to be cherished and to cherish, but it's like, what are we focusing our attention on? So, when it comes to cherishing, I don't actually need to believe a bunch of great things about my husband. I don't need to like be in this place of like deep belief. It's just, what am I focusing on? Like, where is my attention residing? And for me, when it comes to cherishing, it's about nurturing, it's about revering, it's about like adoring. Like there's these things, and they're already there. So if we shift our attention towards the types of things that create this feeling of cherishing, or create kind of this adoration and turn on and all of these other things, we don't have to even change a belief. It's just like, am I looking, like I have different colored walls in my office, so it's like, am I looking at a green colored wall, or am I looking at the white colored wall, right? Like there's these different, like we can literally just turn our head and remember sometimes, like, what am I really focusing my attention on? And when you're choosing, like, I want to cherish this person then what types of things can you allow your attention to be shifted towards that will create those experiences of cherishing? And I think that that practice that I mentioned of almost going through this mental experience of losing them or the impermanence highlights those sorts of things. When we watch on movies, when somebody passes or something, it's like this highlight reel of like the laughter or a tender moment or an exchange of like a gesture. Like it's this highlight reel of these things that allow cherish, and it's really just shifting attention. Like all those things are always there. It's just, what are we paying attention to?
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to share?
I just love that you're doing this podcast episode. I think it's so fun.
It's good.
Such a great question.
Yeah, this is really good. Thank you. My next mentors are Alex and Katie Dutton. Now, the reason why I look up to them as mentors is they remind me of what marriage was like when I was only 5 years married. Yet, there's a part of me that envies them because they're so much further ahead in their 5 years than my wife and I was in our 5 years of marriage together. Not just that, they have an interesting perspective that I think a lot of the listeners to this podcast can relate to. They also happen to be the owners of Every Love Intimates. It's an online lingerie and romance and date night brand. If you're not familiar with them, check out everyloveintimates.com. It's something that my wife and I subscribe to and absolutely love their products. And there's a lot of heart behind what they produce. So let's listen to them and get their perspective on cherishing in marriage. Alex and Katie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Dan.
What comes up for you when you think about what's it mean to cherish one another?
It's a very good question. We talked about a lot, and we kind of broke it down into some different categories that we would love to share with you guys. And I think we kind of want to get started with the idea of love. So do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, cherishing kind of was like, if we think of love as a double-sided coin, love on one side and cherish on the other, that they complete each other. Love is that foundation of your life together, an unchanging commitment to care for each other, kind of like the vows that you make when you get married. And so it's, I will take care of you. I won't leave you. I'll always be here. There's that security that you have in love. But then you flip that over and you get cherishing. And that's more of like that tangible realization of the deepest love that you can have for someone. And it's that outward expression of it in an overflow of your affection and your devotion for that person. And I have to say, when we started thinking about it, Alex and I both got really sentimental, and we're like, man, we need to cherish each other more.
Yeah, no, it was very convicting. Because we really thought about this question because it's a super good question. And I don't think we think about it enough. But yeah, I remember I was like, man, I want to cherish you more. It really convicted us to really actually think about it. And I think going back to how it's a double-sided coin, I think most couples get the love part. They get the, I'm not going to leave you. I'm here for you no matter what. This is an unwavering commitment.
Like the security side of
things.
Sounds like.
Because you can have that without
cherishing.
Without cherishing. Yeah, you can have that love, that foundation of your relationship. But the cherishing is what kind of gets a little harder. I'll let you start.
Yeah, and I feel like we're both naturally pretty romantic people. Makes sense with what we've ended up doing. But especially at the beginning of the relationship, newlywed phase, it's all very natural to be very romantic and to cherish each other. You're so excited about this commitment you've made.
It was almost all we did at first.
Yes.
While we were dating and engaged. It was cherishing each other was almost everything.
Yes.
And then you get married and then it kind of switches.
I feel like for us, it stayed at the beginning of marriage. And for me, it flipped when I had a kid. So when we had our first child, of course, who else?
That's implied.
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone understands that.
But when I had our son Walker, when he was born, that natural cherishing really flipped over to him. Pretty much all of it. It was survival and it was take care of the baby. And where did Alex fit in? And he was taking care of me. He was taking care of the baby. So I think he was still doing a lot of that. But for me, it really all switched. And it was probably a few months of that. And we had this big conversation of him
saying, hey, I feel like I've kind of been replaced. And I know a lot of couples go through this, but that big realization of, yes, this baby feels all consuming to us, but our marriage is first. And we still need to find that time and have that at the forefront of our minds that, hey, we're building this family together, and our love and our relationship and that reflection of Christ's love for us is what our kids need to see first, and what we need to continue to give to each other, even when it's tough.
Yeah. So I think to break it down even a little more, cherishing is like the tangible steps you take towards like pursuing your partner. So I think you can almost look at cherishing with like as pursuit.
Yeah, so we have 3 words that we felt were really good synonyms that kind of encapsulate the word cherish. So that first one is pursuit.
Yeah, so pursuit, and we kind of related it to, if you're familiar with scripture, the parable of the lost sheep. So there's this parable that Jesus tells about a shepherd who had 99 sheep, and one ends up getting lost, and he leaves the others to go find that other sheep, find that one sheep, because he cared about that sheep so much. So I think kind of having that idea of like your spouse is like your number one. Like
you're going to forsake everything else that you have when your spouse needs you, or even if, you don't feel like they necessarily ran away, but they're the one that you have your eyes on.
So pursuit. And the second one
is nourish. And so that one came from Ephesians 5:25, where it says that husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. And I kind of thought about that. I have the worst. I do not have a green thumb. I have the worst instincts with plants, but we've been going through plants with my son in preschool and like teaching him. And I thought of a plant because when you go to plant something, you learn about it a ton and you do everything that it needs. And you don't just throw it on the soil and then leave it. You give it everything it needs. You plant it at the right time. You water it. You come and check on it. You're like, hey, is it growing? Even when, you don't necessarily need to go look on it. You feel the soil. You make sure it's in a good place. You turn the pot if you need to for sunlight. There's all these things that go into nourishing a plant. And although your spouse is independent and they don't need, all of that care to survive, that aspect of you doting on them and you investing your own personal joy and worth in their well-being and in seeing them thrive is a huge part of cherishing.
Love that.
The last one is treasure. So we have pursue, nourish, and treasure. And I think when you hear treasure, sometimes you think of something that's like buried or hidden away. But we want to kind of go at it, frame it as like another parable Jesus told. So the man with the talent, so money. So there was this story of these 3 guys, and each one of them got a certain amount of money. And then their master, the guy who was in charge of them, said, okay, you guys are in charge of this money. Do with it what you're going to do with it. And then come back to me in a couple of weeks and we'll see where you're at. So one man took his money and just buried it.
And that's how we think of treasure, like the dragon that hoards all the stuff and loves it. And that's what we're kind of tempted to do. Yeah. And it kind of should be how we feel with cherishing. Like, I want you all to myself. Yeah. I want time with you. There's an aspect of that. But the one that was praised, if you want to go through the rest of the story.
Yeah, and there was another guy who he kind of used the money a little bit, kind of borrowed with it, made a little bit more, came back to the guy in charge and hey, I doubled it. And then there was another guy who took his few pieces of money, went and invested it, went and did all this stuff with it, and brought back 10 times as much as he was given. So I think that's kind of how we look at cherishing and treasuring in that way, is that you don't just take from your spouse and kind of hide it and just use it for yourself. You kind of take the things about them you love and treasure, cherish. I'm trying to think of another word that
maybe magnify, build on top of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you kind of magnify who they are and what they are and everything that's good about them. And I think in a relationship that's thriving, you're going to see each other, like you build each other up.
And that happens mutually. And then you guys reach your full potential together if you're both doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So pursue, nourish, and treasure. I think that just helps you. I think because cherishing is such kind of an abstract word that can mean a lot of different things. And it just helped us to kind of think of it in different ways.
And for us, that's kind of where really deep, pure intimacy can be fully realized when you're really cherishing your spouse. You're feeling connected to them. It's not just that physical fulfillment, but it's motivation, and it kind of stems from that indescribable love you have for each other. And all three of those words, the nourishing and the treasuring. What was the first one?
Pursuit.
And the pursuit. That's probably the most important in the intimacy category. But yeah, in pursuing each other, it's just this urge to express how you feel and think about your spouse. And that's when intimacy is so much more valuable. It's not just a box you check off, but it's a true meaningful experience that fuels the rest of your relationship and manifests itself in continual cherishing.
Yeah, and I think a point that, I don't know, I think we read this, so we won't take credit for it, but is the idea that your spouse is probably the only person you're going to truly receive like a cherishing spirit from. You can get love from a lot of different people in your life, but in a marriage, I think to like truly feel cherished is only going to come from your spouse. So I think if you're not showing your spouse how much they mean to you, and that like you're the most important thing in my life to me, and like you're the only one I want to be with, they might not be getting that from anywhere else. So I think that helps me think about it a lot, is like, okay, I need to really show Katie that she's like my number one.
You two are a cute couple. As you talk, you're like
Thanks.
bumping into each other. And yeah, that's great. Laughing.
We're going on a
That's
date
great.
after.
Yeah, we're going on a date after this, so we love you.
Well, this is foreplay. This is warming up for the date.
Everything is for.
Absolutely, you got that right. I see, because I coach a lot of couples. I work with a lot of couples, and I dive into their sex lives and to see kind of what's going on. And there's this quality that I see in certain couples that really struggle around sex, where they approach sex as really a way to reinforce themselves. It's like the give to get mentality. I will do the dishes for you. I'll help with this so that I can get this from you. There's like a quality of extraction. Or I see it on the flip side. Sometimes it's I'll give in and give sex so that my spouse will no longer be pouty and grumpy. And so it's really about managing another person's mood. It's a give to get, because you want to get a sense of peace from them. But it's so pervasive in a lot of marriages, they don't even see that that's the dynamic they're operating in. What would you say to a couple like that to help them break through those patterns and to see pursuit and nurturing and treasuring instead?
I think we dealt with that some early on, of like, and I think it was more of having the mindset of like sex is for my gratification, and in flipping that switch just through conversations and just talking about it for us was the way we got there. Was like, okay, no, sex is going to be about taking care of you. And obviously then it's great for me, but kind of flipping that switch towards like your gratification and not necessarily just mine. So I think conversations, and we say this with a lot of stuff with people we like who work with us, but yeah, just talk about it, like, and get on the same level of what we want out of this. I think a lot of times spouses don't know what you want, especially with sex. So I think just telling them and talking about it, and maybe you don't even know what you want. That's something we learned over the years, is a lot of people, especially with intimacy, don't exactly know what they want, but as a couple, you can learn that together.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the coolest parts about marriage, is that whatever's going on, you can do it together and you can learn each other.
Yeah. And I would say, like, piggybacking off of what you're saying, I think it's the mindset shift of correcting that myth that sex is for the other person, but figuring out why you think that, because if it is right now, then maybe what's happening in the bedroom isn't, like, maybe there needs to be more or different, and unpacking, okay, well, what is intimacy for me? And then what is it for them? And what does it mean for us? Combining those two things, because what's happening in the bedroom, or out of it actually too, might be the reason we're thinking it's for someone else. And so getting out of that mindset of, okay, well, it has to be, 5 minutes and then intercourse, or, you know what I mean? Maybe it needs to be something entirely different some of the time. And so just kind of unpacking that, that's a huge one to unpack. And then on the flip side, not always expecting that, but more focusing on what attracted you to them in the first place. Knowing our audience, most of us probably didn't meet each other through a one night stand. So there were probably other elements that, and even if you did, then what kept you there? Something else kept you.
If you're now married.
Yeah, something else kept you there. So what were those things that attracted you to them, that brought you joy, that gave you life, that made you feel loved? And come back to those and let the cherishing start there, rather than dragging yourself to the bedroom and then hoping that it gets better once you're there. Kind of start with those two shifts and be more flexible with what's happening. And I think that kind of can shift it for you.
Yeah, when we started talking about this, we learned that we had very different ideas of what intimacy looked like. Like just tangibly, like what it looked like for both of us. It was very different. So when I knew what Katie was expecting and wanted, and when she knew what I was expecting and wanted, we can go into the experience knowing that, okay, well, Katie wants this, let's do some of that. And Katie knew, oh, Alex wants this.
And if the world educates what sexuality is, and so if you didn't have a good sex education, then, or even if you did, it still has to be personalized. So even what you, especially I think for a woman, it's a little more complicated sometimes. So even what you think is what you want, if like just both of you try to be patient and flexible with each other, because it can change seasonally. It can change throughout your life based on what's going on in your physical health, your mindset, your circumstances. Everything can change. There's hormones, there's menopause, there's ED, there's so many things that go on, and intimacy is still possible, and it's still so crucial to your marriage. So I think just continually kind of checking in on that and remembering, hey, it doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to be what the world tells me it looks or feels like. It needs to be what works for us and what honors God in our marriage. And when you dedicate yourselves to learning that and continuing to learn that, not only do you experience better intimacy in the bedroom, but you experience the fullness, I think, of your relationship, of cherishing one another. You grow together, you trust each other, you get through hard times together, you tick off all of those boxes that they say lowers your risk of divorce, because you're in it together with something that can challenge you and cause you to continually learn about each other and grow.
As we're talking, I just think about, like, even in my own marriage, and I see this with other couples too, you get to a point where you do kind of like learn how to function sexually fairly well. Like, you figure out the things that work for you, and things are going well, yet you know there's a next level for you. But there's this, it's like the strong inertia forces, or some like force that keeps you where you are because it's comfortable. And it's risky to say, you know, I think we need to change our routine or change the way we approach, because if you step outside of that, you risk offending your spouse, you risk getting no sex, you risk, other things are at risk. So a lot of couples kind of settle for the status quo, and it takes an incredible amount of honesty to really look inside and say, you know, the way I'm approaching sex is really for my own gratification, or I manipulate you, or I really coerce you in very subtle, nice ways that aren't actually really nice, so that you reinforce what I want, whether that's to have more sex or to have less sex, or to do certain sexual behaviors or not. And it takes a great deal of integrity to go deep inside and say, you know what, the way I've been operating isn't the best for our marriage. Let's fix that and change that. And I like what you're talking about pursuing, because when you actually pursue your spouse, I think you're actually pursuing them as a person separate from you. Whereas what keeps a lot of couples stuck in the status quo really isn't pursuit of anything other than staying comfortable, because then they don't have to actually pursue their spouse, right? They don't have to actually take that risk to go after something different. So this is wonderful to talk about.
Yeah, then like we said, just talking like that gives a lot of freedom to changing things, because if you can both be on the same level, and they're not always easy, they're not the easiest conversations. Sometimes they can be difficult, but they're definitely worth it for sure.
Thank you very much, Alex and Katie.
All right,
This has been
Thank you. You're
fantastic.
we appreciate you and everything you do.